I'm a little confused. What just happened? Da, 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 da. All right, I have been holding on to these markers for I don't even know how long. There's like dust all over them. I've not even opened them. This is my first time interacting with them. So this is just the regular rainbow set of Tombow dual brush markers with one bonus marker. And I specifically picked this one because it had the pink, which matches up with the Crayola pink. This is the packaging for anyone unfamiliar with Tombow. And I did buy a separate gray. This is a N45, and I actually don't even know if this is the right gray. I had this gray, so I'm not sure which one is going to be closer to the Crayola, so I'll go ahead and test it out. I have two grays now. But yeah, let's go ahead and open this up. And here we are. Oh my gosh, look at that rainbow. Oh my god, is that two greens? How did I not notice this? Y'all, the two greens haunt me. So first thing we will notice is that there are two greens. Like, why green? We will have to dive. For people who don't know, clearly you haven't seen my other videos. Put the packaging aside. All of the Tombow markers that I own, including it comes with a blending marker. Do they just put water in it? Let's go ahead and get the paper out. I already have brushes ready to go. I'll be using the Canson XL watercolor paper, which if you don't know anything about this paper, I do have a massive video talking about a bunch of different cheap paper for watercolor artists and, you know, obviously water-based marker artists, same thing, you know, basically. So it comes with just a regular pink, a 703. I have no idea what these numbers even mean, but here's all the colors that I have, basically the rainbow. We're going to swatch them out. So it's a brush nib on one side and then a bullet. It's so natural for me to put my hand there. For a bullet nib on the other side, which is already a difference with the Crayola markers. All right, so compare with the, it's so funny seeing them side by side. But yeah, the Crayola markers for the broad sets, this is their tip, just to compare. Not me spending that whole intro not realizing that my light isn't on. Ah! I did this whole setup for nothing. Okay, anyway, light is on now. You guys can see, look, it's a marker. Professional YouTuber. How many years have I been doing this? And I've never made a single mistake, not even once. All right, so we're switching to voice over me as we get going into this. I did record all of my live reactions, but post doing all of this stuff, I realized it's sort of not fair to the Tombow brand and these markers for my immediate live reactions. So for context, I've used Crayola markers for my water-based marker artwork for a couple of years now. So I'm very familiar with how Crayola markers work. I've tried out their non-classic brands, markers, their skin tone brands. They're bold, bright, all of them, tropical. I've used them all. So I'm very familiar with how the different Crayola markers work. And this is my different water-based marker brand. So my first impressions here are heavily based off of my experience using Crayola markers. So I'm going to go ahead and just get that context out there so you understand that my first impressions were not good, actually, surprisingly. I actually struggled a bit with these markers and found them kind of gross to begin with, but I want to explain more kind of how to use these markers, because now that I've done all of this stuff, I can give you the tips and tricks of how these markers work. So the initial swatching I did here, I'm doing a side-by-side with the Crayola versus the Tombow. I have two grays just because I happen to have an extra gray. And the purple in this set, I want to throw this out there immediately. It's not purple, it's like a blue indigo. So that was very disappointing. I was, you know, looking forward to having a fairly one-to-one comparison with the Crayola. Didn't happen, but you know, it's all right. So the initial swatching was fine. These obviously have a brush nib and a bullet nib. I'm not a big bullet nib fan, but it's there for those who might want or need it. And there are occasional times where I use the Crayola fine lines for those really tiny things that I can't get with the broad nibs. So it's there if you need it. I do appreciate the convenience of a double-sided marker. So my initial swatching here now is where I'm trying out different with these markers. So straight onto the paper using water brush, and eventually I'll be using their blending marker. So I'm starting out just straight blending with only the markers, and that's when I immediately noticed issues. So Crayola is very, very smooth, specifically their classic set. One of their multicultural skin tone set, and I forget another one. I think it was the tropical. It's been a while since I've used the other sets. But they have some issues there. But the classic Crayola set is very smooth. When you use it, it goes down very clean. It blends beautifully. It is a lovely medium to use. I highly recommend it. But remember, it's not light fast, so it will fade eventually. these Tombow markers, when I was blending with them straight with the marker, I noticed that it really tore into the paper, and I described it at the time of making this video as like a cat's tongue. You know how they're like, they have little barbs on it when they're like licking themselves, they can like really tear into their fur, but you know, like get into the fur and like clean things up and everything. But if you've been licked by a cat before, you feel it. You feel the little barbed things on it. And that's what it felt like when using these markers on this paper. And this is more heavy duty-ish paper. It's not like the most heavy duty paper out there, but it is Canson watercolor XL paper. It's decent enough for watercolor projects. I've used it beautifully with my Crayola projects, so I didn't anticipate a problem with this paper. If this was a mixed media paper, something like a softer paper, a less heavy weighted paper, I would have expected some problems. But I didn't anticipate that here. But it really tore into the paper, even just on a second layer. So if I put one layer down, perfect, no issue. I put a second layer down immediately, right after, issues. It started to tear into the paper, I would get little paper bits, things would start to be a little bit gross. If you hear thunder, we're getting a bit of a storm soon, so sorry about that. But yeah, so I noticed some issues with it, and that was kind of frustrating with me. So testing on the side, I was testing how they would blend out. Both of them blended very beautifully. I didn't have an issue when using my water-based brushes. Oh my god, when using my water brushes, I didn't have any issue there. They both blended basically the same. Right now, I'm just comparing the blacks, just because blacks can really vary per set, and sometimes they can lean more cool or lean more warm, so I like to compare that too. And I just noticed the blending with the water brushes themselves, totally fine, basically exactly the same. It's when I was using the straight markers themselves that I noticed the difference. And for a technique that I use a ton with my Crayola markers is that I'll use the water brush directly onto the marker itself. So the marker tip, the nib part, I would put my water brush on it to pick up some of that pigment, some of that ink, and then I would paint. It's kind of like a very light touch of the color instead of using the direct marker, so you get a lighter touch of color. I use that all of the time. When I did that here with the Tombow markers, I do it later in one of the artworks, it destroyed the marker. It did not work at all. It was very bad. It didn't pick up much ink anyway, and it just like was not good for the marker. So don't use that technique with Tombow markers. Use something plastic. Use a plastic palette. If you have like a sandwich bag, just anything that's like plastic, then you can scribble the marker onto that, and then you can use that ink on that plastic to pick up with your water brush, and you get the exact same thing. So Crayola, you can pick up directly from the marker nib. Tombow, you cannot. So there are quirks with each of these marker brands that I'd never really considered to be that drastically different, but they are. I know I'm still kind of going fast here. There's a lot to cover, and I'll talk a bit more about the layering. There's a solution to that, don't worry. So the blending marker that comes with the kit, I don't know what's going on with that. I fiddled with it just a little bit, and maybe I needed to give it a little bit more time and attention. Maybe I'll play around with it more later. It's just trash. I didn't really see a good use of it when I used it directly, when I put the markers directly onto the paper, and then I put the blending marker that comes with it directly over that marker. It didn't really blend nearly as smoothly or nearly as cleanly as just a water brush marker, or just any brush with water. You don't have to use water brushes. I just prefer water brushes just because it's convenient for this type of medium for me. But yeah, so the blending brush that came with it, I did not like it at all. Benefit of the doubt, maybe there's some use with it later, but first impressions, very much not good. It didn't work great either with the Crayola, so the lighter, more warm chocolatey brown on the right hand side under the blacks, that's the Crayola. I used the blending marker with that, and it blended more, but it's still very choppy, and it's still, I don't know how to use a descriptor other than gross. Like, I did not enjoy the experience. And then I tried blending the Crayola and the Tombow together, worked just fine. I think you could use both markers together in an artwork, and you're golden, you're good, no problem there. I tried out using the bullet nib and see what would happen if I add water to that. And it doesn't really cleanly blend out everything. So if you really want to hide your edges, use the brush nib side. If you want a little bit of texture, you can use the bullet nib side. A lot of this is all trial and error and just sort of figuring things out, how these things work. That's what I was saying. My initial review and first impressions of this were very negative, because it was like, wow, all of my usual techniques and stuff that I've learned to do with Crayola, they don't work, really. I have to make adjustments. But yeah, so the bottom corner with the bright oranges, that was me layering again and again and again and again. And I could get a ton of layers with Crayola before it started to pile up and get gross. And I got 2 layers with Tombow before it started to tear into the paper. So let's talk about tearing into the paper. Speaking of, we're bringing that back. All right, so this first drawing here, I actually have a full-blown, real-time, talking through the entire thing tutorial over on my Ko-fi page. So if you want a more detailed dive into using Tombow markers and doing this specific drawing / painting yourself, I'll put a link to that in the description. Anyway, when doing this drawing, I realized some things, and the main aspect was dry time. So I feel like somehow the texture on the nib of the marker is not as smooth as Crayola. There's something a little bit more there. Like I said, it felt like a cat like licking me. And it sounds weird, but I can't think of any other description. But yeah, so I found that if I let the layers dry in between, I put down 1 layer of marker and I just leave it alone. Add water if I needed to, don't add water if I didn't need to. Like with these trees, I didn't blend them out with water. I just left them as is. If I let that orange dry completely, and then I came back again with another layer of color, it was totally fine. So I think the secret difference between Crayola and Tombow in terms of layering is just dry time. Crayola, you don't really need dry time. You can just go directly on top of each other and it's fine. Tombow, you need a little bit of space. It needs a little bit of a breather, don't rush it. So it's a little bit slower going, I guess, but not really. I mean, I did this tree drawing in I think like 30 minutes or just under 30 minutes. So you can still do something super fast. I mean, they're markers. You're going to be able to go quick with them. But yeah, the big secret there was really just let things dry in between. And once I figured that out, the experience was almost exactly the same as Crayola. The colors are obviously slightly different than my Crayola markers, but who cares about that? It blends very smoothly with water. I didn't have an issue with it at all in regards to that. And I'm just kind of flipping through my sketchbook here. I didn't really use the bullet nibs just because I don't use bullet nibs, but maybe in the future I'll fiddle around more with that. Aside from that, I really had a nice time with these markers. And I did also draw a duck to compare. I did a side-by-side comparison. I did one drawing with Crayola markers or 2 drawings with Crayola markers and then the same exact 2 drawings with the Tombow markers. And the colors will differ slightly and the quality will differ slightly just because, I'm human, I'm imperfect, I can't do things exactly the same both times. I will comment that the duck, the second duck that I did, I wish I went a little bit bolder with the colors and the details and stuff, so I don't like it as much as the Crayola, but I think that's more my fault than the fault of the markers. But I didn't notice anything when I was drawing the Tombow duck. You could have just left out all that information about having issues with layering, about I didn't actually use the blending marker, so I wouldn't have known that, but but I didn't have any issues with the paper tearing up. I didn't have any problems with it. It felt completely normal. The only difference was just I felt a little intimidated because they weren't Crayola, so I was like, how do I use these? It's different and scary. But yeah, I actually had a really great time using them. And my one main problem I had when I was actually doing the duck was that these markers are too new. When I did the duck in Crayola, I have a good mix now of dead and fresh markers. So if I want to have certain textures or certain looks or whatever, I can go for one or the other marker. Whereas these Tombow markers, I only have this brand new set. So they're completely, polished, brand new, full of ink, flowing out like crazy and everything. So I couldn't use a technique that I do enjoy using, which is using dead markers. And that was my main qualm when working on the duck. And that was it. I had a great time otherwise. So really, if I had to pick one or the other, I'd probably still pick Crayola just because, I love Crayola. I'm a Crayola girl, all right, But these Tombows aren't bad, and I actually would be very much open to using them in the future. And I think they're quite comparable. So if you've been using Tombow and you're like, Crayola, how can that be any good or whatever? Well, here you go. I'm telling you that the experiences are basically the same. You're basically going to have the exact same experience using either one of these brands. It's just about preference in terms of technique and getting used to the different techniques. And, I kind of gave Tombow a little bit of crap with, the quality here and there of me getting used to it. But I had similar issues when I started working with Crayola. My initial experiences with Crayola did take a learning curve to get used to how that specific product works. And really, that's kind of how it is with every medium. Like, two different acrylic paint brands are going to behave differently. Two different watercolor brands are going to behave slightly differently. Like, you're going to have a slightly different experience with all these different things. And even within the Crayola brand itself, as I very quickly mentioned earlier, the multicultural skin tone set, how the makeup of those markers behave completely differently than the classic set. And I actually don't like the multicultural set because of how difficult it is to work with them. They don't really blend that well. There's some sort of texture inside the marker that comes out that I don't love. There's certain aspects of it. So even within the Crayola brand, there's different things going on that you need to get used to and adjust with. That's basically it. That's my review here of the Tombow, is that I enjoyed the experience once I got over, needing to adjust to its needs. And I had a really good time. So if you use Crayola markers and you're like, maybe I want to try a more serious brand, I guess. I don't know how else to describe Tombow. I think you would have a bit of a learning curve, a little bit of an adjustment, but you could do it. If you're a Tombow artist and you're like, Crayola feels like, a little childish, could it really be that good? I don't know, but it's cheap and maybe it's worth trying. I don't know. And I say go for it. Like, I don't think you can go wrong really either way with either brand. And also, I guess a difference is, the nibs themselves. You don't need to buy a separate set of markers with the Tombow because it's 2-in-1. Whereas if you do want that bullet nib experience and the broader nib experience, you need to buy 2 sets of Crayola markers. But to be fair, the price is significantly cheaper with Crayola markers versus the Tombow. The Tombows are kind of expensive. So if you're wanting to branch into water-based marker experience, like maybe you normally do watercolors and you're like, I want to try, water-based markers. An entry level is, I think, is Crayola. I think you could start there and see if you like it. And if you want to, it's hard for me to call it an upgrade because the quality, like the experience was so similar. I don't, I don't know what to say. But I guess I'll go ahead and leave it there. So go ahead and let me know in the comment section below, which brand do you use? Do you use a different brand? I know there's, more and more brands coming out. And I also know, and I also have Artist Loft. So if you'd like to see me do another Artist Loft review / comparison, let me know in the comments down below. That'll be a super interesting experience, I have no doubt. We'll see. I mean, I've reviewed already Crazy Art Markers, which is a child brand equivalent to Crayola, and that was an interesting experience. So to see Artist Loft be a competitor to Tombow, that would, I think, be an interesting experience as well. So let me know in the comments, your thoughts on either of these brands or any brand. 2, if you use a different brand, let me know. I'm super curious about water-based markers. I've been loving the medium. And then 3, if you'd like to see me do an Artist Loft review / comparison, add that to the pile of all my other water-based marker reviews. And again, if you would like to see the tutorial on the winter tree landscape drawing, you can check out the link in the description down below. Have full real time, take you step by step. You can draw the exact same thing yourself. You can use whatever water marker brand you have. Totally fine. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can, give a like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. But you can also check out my Ko-fi page, linked in the description down below. I have a ton more tutorials and resources and all sorts of wild stuff over there. But yeah, thank you guys so much for your patience as well in between videos. I know it's been a long time since I've really posted a video. I appreciate it. But yeah, I don't have anything else to say. So, let me know what's new, what's happening, how's life for all y'all. Thanks so much for watching. And I'm gonna go now. So thanks, y'all. Have a good one. Bye-bye.